From the Toronto Star, I'm Saba Eitizaz, and this matters. Here's the thing. There is only so much Netflixing one can do in the grip of a pandemic and a second lockdown. It can get monotonous, and it might be a good time to turn to the comforting act of reading for many of us. Comfort reading is an actual thing. And what better time to catch up with the best of Canada's literature than while we're all stuck at home trying to cope with something we've never experienced before. And despite the challenges of COVID-19, like for any other industry, book award season is here. The prestigious Giller Prize has recently announced its shortlist, which is not short on diverse Canadian literature, and we'll have a winner next month. I thought this would be a good time to sit down with the Star's books editor, Deborah Dundas, to have a cozy little chat about what's happening in Canadian literature and what are some great books you can pick up during this time when we have all this time to read them. Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for asking me. It's always fun to be able to talk about books.
It is. So how's your pandemic reading been going? I think I had that phase where books were the only thing keeping me going through this, and then one where I never wanted to look at one again, and then repeat cycle one. So how's it for you?
Do you know, there's a lot of books this year. At the beginning of the year in April, people weren't sure what's going to happen. So books that were going to be published in the spring were moved to the fall, which created an incredibly crowded field in the fall. I think there's the number that on September 1st alone, 600 books came out.
Wow.
So it's been a big year for books. And I think it's tough for publicists and publishers to try and get information out about the books. It's tough for readers to try and sift through all the different books that have come out because there's such a deluge. It's a challenge for readers to figure out what exactly they want to pick up and what books really catch their eye.
So I'm going to dig deeper on that one with you later, but also officially, this is kind of like award season for books in Canada, right? What's on the horizon?
Well, absolutely. This week, the Giller shortlist came out. There's 5 works of fiction that have made that shortlist. The Writers' Trust Fiction Prize shortlist also came out. And we've got the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize. So right there's a lovely reading list of 15 books for those who want. In the Giller shortlist, it was interesting because indie publishers really shone. Ridge Runner by Jill Adamson was from House of Anansi. Hear the Dark from David Bergen was from Biblioasis. Polar Vortex by Shani Mutu was from Book Hug. I love that name. The Glass Hotel from Emily St. John Mandel was one from HarperCollins. And then The Behemoth, Penguin Random House, one of their imprints, McClelland and Stewart, managed to snag a finalist spot with How to Pronounce Knife by Subin Kamamwangsa. So, there's a lot to read there. The Writers' Trust list, there was only one that showed up on both lists, and that was Ridge Runner by Jill Adamson, which is interesting. I mean, that's a big, long, epic saga of a book that's sort of set in Alberta in the Old West. And it's a wonderful read. I spoke to her about it when it first came out, and she spent 10 years writing it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. She's a slow, very meticulous writer and researcher, so it's a great book to read, and it's really immersive. The next one that was on the Writers' Trust list was Indians on Vacation by Thomas King. He was also a long list on the Giller, but he didn't make it to the short list there. So that sort of shows you is that you never know what a jury's going to come up with, right? They all have different tastes and they've got the same pool of books, and sometimes the lists are just completely different.
Like any awards program, it's highly unpredictable, and that's the excitement of it.
Absolutely, and subjective, and everybody waits and goes, "Ooh, what's going to happen?" Except for Jill's book from the Writers' Trust, the rest are from either HarperCollins or from Penguin Random House. So, they went for the big publishing houses. The other 3 books on that list were Good Citizens Need Not Fear by Maria Riva, 5 Little Indians from Michelle Good, and Beguiling from Susie Gartner. Now, people may have seen Susie Gartner's name before. She's written lots of short story collections and won many awards, but this is actually her first novel. She's a debut writer after years of writing and sort of being in the public consciousness.
And this is a very interesting list for anybody that might want to take these up before the winners are announced. We're just talking about the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and for other things in the world, it's been challenging for publishing as well, hasn't it? So in terms of book publishing and promotions, how has this season been different? Has it been especially difficult for the small or indie publishers? And keeping that in mind, what does it say that a lot of the indie publishers have dominated the finalist list for the Giller Prize?
I don't know that the indie publishers dominating the list for the Giller Prize has anything really to do with the publishing landscape right now. It's just the books that sort of caught the jury's eye, and that's it. I do think that publishers right across the board have had a tricky time this year because of the pandemic. Right across the board, they haven't been able to get space for their books. Publicists want to get interviews, want to get reviews, want to get even the smallest mentions. I know I'm at home and I'm getting hundreds of books sent to me all the time and constant emails from publicists, because people look to us to get information on what books they want to read. With 600 books coming out in September 1st alone, it's hard for the average reader to kind of sift through and say, well, what's good, what's bad, what should I not be bothered with, and what should I be bothered with? So there's been that. I think in terms of sales, one thing that's really skyrocketed, I was speaking to the president of Kobo the week before, and he was telling me that the sale of ebooks has actually doubled, I think it was.
Oh.
Yeah, so ebooks have really taken off. Now, those aren't great for publishers in some ways because they don't make as much money, but they are still publishing the books, right? And they're getting bought. So there are parts of the publishing industry that are doing okay. Some of the smaller publishers as well have been doing well because they're offering different things to people. Independent bookstores, for example. Some small publishers also have independent bookstores that they run, Biblioasis being an example of that. So they've been able to leverage that, and they're doing good sales, and they're also able to publish the books. So that's kind of helping.
Right. Everybody's getting creative.
Everybody's getting creative. Everybody's getting innovative. I mean, I know Heather Reisman from Chapters Indigo has said that it's dire circumstances for them. They have big brick and mortar presence. They're not buying as many books from small publishers. And this is important. The ones they have bought from small publishers, the ones they have in their sort of backlog, they're sending back to small publishers unsold. So small publishers who think they've actually sold these books because Chapters Indigo has ordered them, they're suddenly getting all of these books back. And that's having an effect on small publishers' bottom lines. So that's an interesting thing I don't think everybody knows about.
Yeah, that's actually quite an insight. I didn't know that you could send books back to the publishers.
Yeah, it's a program that was set up a long time ago, and it's not working very well for independent publishers anymore. The idea was that the big outlets will order the books, and they have the right to send them back if they don't sell, which means that they will give smaller publishers and unknown authors a bit of a chance because they're not taking the risk, right? What they can do is if the book doesn't sell, they just send it back. But at a point in time like this, it really means that the small independent publishers are sort of having all of these books dumped back on them, and it's creating a problem.
We'll be right back. Okay, so now with a drum roll, let's talk a little bit more about the contenders for the award. I'm personally very excited about The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John. which I've just started reading. Although, don't you kind of wish she'd written her previous one, Station 11, now considering it's such an eerie reflection of the pandemic times we are going through?
Oh my gosh, it was funny because when the pandemic first happened, March and April, she was saying, okay, don't read it, people. She was sending it on Twitter. Don't read Stations 11. You don't want that right now. Read The Glass Hotel. And it was a tricky time for her because The Glass Hotel was coming out in April, right? I actually interviewed her for that. And the prescience she had was sort of interesting. And it was pretty spooky how many things in Station 11 actually were exactly the same as they are now. There have been a couple of books like that have been interesting like that.
Exactly. And I must confess that my co-host Adrian and I actually started rereading that just as we were all forced to go into self-isolation and things were just beginning, despite us telling each other, like, don't read it again. But we did. You have to, you're compelled.
Well, do you know what? I mean, it's kind of, there's hope to it, right? And we're all looking for a little hope. So, that's why we read horror books, right? We want to be scared, but we know that there's going to be an outcome at the end that's going to be lived through. We face up to our fears, right? And that's part of what books help us do. And so these ones that actually went right into the pandemic, awesome, right? Helps us hold up a mirror to our own fears and work our way through them. So it's useful that way.
It helps to know that one can always hope for a happy ending.
That's right. Fingers crossed.
So, okay, what are winners for you personally, Deborah, from what you've read of this list? Who would you recommend and why? And any books on the long list that you feel should have made it all the way to the end?
Well, with the Giller, it was interesting because this was the first year they'd opened it up to graphic novels. And Seth, his book, Clyde Fans, which he'd been working on for 20 years. I mean, it's a bit of a masterpiece for him, and it's a wonderful book. I was kind of hoping it would end up on the Giller shortlist. It didn't. I can see why. It's a graphic novel. It's a little bit different. But if they're going to open it up, I suppose they can, it's got as good a chance as any of them. So maybe it just wasn't the taste of the judges and they didn't think it was good enough against the other ones. But I would have liked to see that on the Giller shortlist. I was a little surprised that Tom King didn't make the Giller shortlist either. I think this was his first nomination. He's been writing for years. So I think he might have been a bit of a sentimental favorite to make it onto the Giller list. Ridge Runner by Jill Adamson. I really enjoyed that, actually. It was the follow-up. She'd written her first book, The Outlander, which had the same characters in it. And it just went crazy, international sales, and it was really well received. And she'd been working on this as a sort of follow-up, a bit of a sequel, but a number of years later. And it's so immersive. It just kind of takes you away, and it's full of historical detail. And her researching is just amazing. So I really enjoyed that one as well. Beguiling's been getting good reviews. I haven't actually read that. And Michelle Good, Five Little Indians. I did think it was sort of interesting that we had two titles on the Writers' Trust list with the word Indians in it, which is not particularly, it's not the term we use right now. It's very historical. It's very old-fashioned. I've spoken about it with Tom King, and he admits, that it could be a different word. It could be indigenous. It could be native, but it's Indians. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with the titles of that. So I thought it was an interesting discussion that might come up, within the Writers' Trust Prize, and discussions around the prize is just focusing of the word on those particular titles.
Oh, there's some controversy there on the particular choice of titles. This is getting more and more intriguing by the second. Also, what's your take on some of this season's nonfiction titles? Is there anything we should be excited about?
So the Hillary Weston Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize was announced, and there's some beautiful books on that. There's Lorna Crozier. She's one of the most well-known poets in the country. And she was married to Patrick Lane, and he died, I think it was last year. And this is her story about them, Through the Garden, a Love Story with Cats. It's a beautiful memoir that takes a look at love, at poetry, at Canadian legends, and it's really quite beautiful. Another one, I spoke with Tessa McWatt for her book, Shame on Me, which is a memoir. She lives in London right now, but she grew up, was raised in Toronto, and it's about shame, in sort of quotation marks, about being a very much mixed race person and trying to come to terms with all of the conflicts that's raised within her life. And her writing is so beautiful and it's just so profound and she's so passionate. I really recommend that one.
I'm sure you're getting annoyed because I'm going to keep asking you for recommendations, which I'm getting you get a lot out of. One book you would recommend if someone is getting a little bit of the pandemic fatigue and wants to get away from it all for a bit. I know that you've been talking about Ridge Runner, which seems like it might fit into that. And also one that you might feel would be a good reflection of our times or the current discourse. So 2 books that you recommend.
Well, you know what? If you want something that's a reflection of our times, I've kind of got 2 of them. One is Selena Nawaz and her songs for the end of the world. She is absolutely amazing. And the book, I couldn't believe it. It sucked me right in because every single detail, and she wrote this, she finished this a couple of years ago, okay? And every single detail, right down to the hoarding of things, the masks, how we would react, the social distancing was exact in that book. So it was such an eerie read, and she'd done so much research, and it was perfectly bang on. Plus, it's just an immersive read. It was well written and well paced, and it was fabulous. So I would recommend for sure. Then there's Emma Donoghue. Her latest book was set in a pandemic in 1918, and the parallels there are really interesting. So again, she was already working on a book that had a lot of really interesting parallels to right now. And, there's hope. They lived through it, right? That's a good thing.
Definitely.
So both of them give us hope. And, I've been going to mysteries, frankly, for my escapist kind of reading. Ian Rankin is out with his new one. I always like reading his detective stuff. So that's something I would recommend. Any mysteries that are out there right now, I think, are great escapes. They give your mind something to do. You can actually focus and maybe solve a problem. It gives you a focus. It gives you conclusion, gives you a resolution. And I think that's something psychologically we all need right now when we're just all worried about how everything's going to turn out.
Thank you so much for this, Deborah. I have quite a hefty list of recommendations that I've built off of this conversation, and I think I will be shortly going into a book buying spree. So thank you so much for the insight, and thank you for being on.
Okay, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I was talking to the Star's books editor, Deborah Dundas, about the Giller Prize and some great reads. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Saba Eitizaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Murther. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.